now Senator Brown, who was the co-author of the American Family Act, that we did write, Dr. Cornith, 2 years before the study that you've indicted here this morning, which didn't form any basis for that bill. But I do want to say that none of the progress that we would have made, if one considers it progress, to cut childhood poverty almost in half, would have happened without the leadership of Senator Brown, and I want to thank him for that on behalf of the kids in Colorado, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and as you know, I share that credit with you, certainly in the work you've done, and we've been working on this for a lot of years, and I have said many times, and I know you concur, that the best day of my career was March 6, 2021, when I was sitting next to Senator Casey on the floor and turned to him and talked about that. We had a couple other things that mattered in that too, a pension bill too, but I remember after that, we all kind of teamed up and talked to Secretary Yellen after the president signed it, and he went to the IRS commissioner, a Trump appointee who was a professional and not only didn't stand in the way, but accelerated it. By July of that year. By July of that year, the checks went out to 60 million, to families of 60 million children, 2 million in my state, 2 million in Pennsylvania, hundreds of thousands in Colorado. The child poverty rate dropped by 40%, not quite immediately, but quickly, and it's the way government's supposed to run. We do something. We listened to people like you. We acted as a group. Senator Bennett was a real star in that. And we passed a bill. We made sure it was implemented. We got the administration to do it right. And look what happened. Unfortunately, we were not able to make it permanent. That's the mission I know the three of us on this panel are committed to. So I'd start with Mr. Datta-Gupta and Ms. Mishmore. You both mentioned in your testimony the research that tells us a permanently expanded CTC would cost taxpayers $97 billion per year, but it would generate literally 10 times that in annual economic stimulus via future earnings and tax contributions. And I love the back and forth between Senator Bennett and Senator Thune. I like Senator Thune. I just think he's colossally wrong when it comes to tax cuts for the rich, which do very little but shift the tax burden to the wrong people. But what Senator Bennett said about what this means, what the two of you, and I will let you answer in a second, what the two of you have said. We talk a lot about the cost. Conservatives talk about the cost. People that want tax cuts for the rich talk about the cost in this, never talk about the benefits. So tell us more about the cost-benefit analysis you mentioned, both of you, Mr. Datta-Gupta and Ms. Mishmore, if you would.
Thank you for the question, Senator Brown. Yes, I'd be happy to talk about that. Some of my own work in this area, and I think from other mounting evidence, suggests that when kids get more income in childhood through tax credits like the Earned Income Tax Credit, they go on to have much higher earnings in adulthood. And so I think that's a big component of the benefits that have been calculated. They've also been shown to reduce health costs in the future and reduce costs through things like reducing crime.
Thank you, Mr. Duca.
And Senator Brown, first, thank you for your extraordinary leadership with Senator Bennett on this issue. I would just add that it also reduces interaction with the Child Protective Services, child welfare system. So we're keeping families together, which I think is hugely important. And we're talking about nearly 24 studies. And in many ways, we can actually isolate the impact of income itself as a transfer. And I think we have very good reason to believe in some ways that these estimates might even be conservative. So, I mean, just imagine, we talked about being in the private sector. If you could get a 9-to-1, 10-to-1 return on investment, how foolish would you be to not make that investment? This is an investment that only the United States can make, only the government can make.
And you think of the economic growth just overall and how that really is a case of lifting out all boats, not tax cuts for the rich, but directly investing in workers and the working poor and in the middle class and workers generally. One other thing I wanted to mention, Chair Bennett, he called this hearing in part to highlight the bipartisan history of CTC. I worked with Senator Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. We've worked on a number of things together. He sits on this committee on a temporary measure that strengthened CTC. During the pandemic, many families saw their wages take a hit because they got laid off or saw their hours cut. That in turn reflected the amount of their additional CTC. So Senator Cassidy and I got a bill passed that allowed families to use their 2019 wages instead of 2020 wages for purposes of the CTC. We call it the look-back option. And again, we got it done bipartisanly. It had broad support here when families filed their taxes in 2021. Mr. Dutta-Gupta, tell us why this would be so important to working families if it became permanent law.
Yeah, Senator Brown, as you described, the tax credit look back really helps folks when they face wage reduction or they lose their jobs and they have the option of figuring out which year of income would give them the higher benefit. And this happened obviously a lot in the pandemic, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, let me interrupt and explore that. And sorry,
Take whatever time you want.
Thank you.
Senator Brown, take whatever time.
Thank you.
You won't be the first.
I assume the people that benefit centrally and the most from the CTC are if in fact there is data on this, I would assume it, but are people whose incomes are more like this, right? That they are likely to pass in and out of good or better or worse jobs, likely to get laid off, likely to have their hours cut, likely to not have child care, so their hours are different. Is that probably generally right?
Yeah, we have good reason to believe that there's more income volatility at the very bottom of the income distribution, and the low-paid, low-wage labor market itself often treats workers, especially during an economic recession, as quite disposable. So I think that's right. I just want to add that one other thing that you've pushed for, full refundability, helps with this problem. For what full refundability says is, look, you may have lost hours on the job, you may have even lost your job, but we're not also going to cut the child tax credit. You at least have that floor. You don't have to then pull your kid out of after-school programs. You don't have to stop the music lessons. You don't have to cut back necessarily on the nutritious food you're providing. So the look-back option is a terrific option that you all enacted temporarily, and full refundability as well actually really helps with this challenge. It helps smooth incomes and people's consumption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Very much appreciate your leadership here. Senator Casey.
I want to thank Senator